Hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking about instrument departures in Microsoft Flight Simulator. This is part 2 of my IFR series, so you might want to check that one out first because I'm going to be building upon a lot of the stuff that I explained in that first video. There are two categories of departures that you can do with instrument flying in Flight Sim. That's the obstacle departures and the standard instrument departures, also known as SIDs. Today I'm going to be covering a subset of these SIDs, and I'm going to be looking at RNAV departures. RNAV stands for Area Navigation, and you can think of them as the next-gen version of departure procedures that leverage the power of the GPS to determine precisely where you have to fly. Of course, that implies that you've got an airplane with a GPS that's precise enough to be able to fly the procedure. Really, the only airplane you can't use is the Cessna 152, the steam gauge version of the Cessna 172, and any other airplane that doesn't have a GPS on board. Planes that don't have a GPS need to use non-RNAV procedures, which is really the procedures that airplanes have been using until the GPS really came along and reinvented everything. Alright, without further ado, let's get going. I'm flying out of a bigger airport than usual today because I needed an airport with actual departure procedures, and I wanted to fly in an area with lots of instrument flying. There's no better place for that than the Pacific Northwest, which is often covered in clouds and rain, just like today. I've set up a flight plan from Seattle up to Port Angeles, which is right near the Canadian border. I'm going to be departing on runway 16C, and I'm going to be using the Banger 9 departure, which is the RNAV departure. I found my departure chart for this flight just by putting in the code of the airport plus the name of the departure, and it came right up in Google. I printed out a copy of the chart, but I will also put it in an overlay on the video just so you can keep track of where we are and what I'm doing relative to the chart. Just as a quick refresher, I chose IFR low altitude airways because I'm going to be staying below 18,000 feet, and then I chose my departure procedure from the drop down right here. I set myself up for an approach on the ILS runway 08, but I won't be showing that today. I really just did that just to have the complete flight plan set up. One neat thing is that all of the waypoints that I need to fly actually appear on the flight plan here, and I could really just use this to be able to figure out where I have to go, but the chart's going to give me a little bit more detail, and I'll get into that once I'm flying. One thing that you can't see though is the different altitudes that you need to fly at depending on which segment that you're currently flying. Especially in the Pacific Northwest, there are a lot of mountains, especially right around here, so if you're not at a sufficient altitude, you're going to end up crashing into the side of a mountain. That's why I've got my chart handy, and I'll go through that as I'm flying the flight. Just before I get going, if you do get any value out of this video, please make sure to hit like and subscribe. It helps others find the video, and it gives me an indication of what types of videos you're interested in. As usual, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to put them below. Alright, I won't be flying with ATC enabled today. To be quite honest, the ATC in the game isn't fantastic, so I tend to avoid it. I'll probably do a separate video just explaining how to do the communications with ATC, but I won't cover it in this one. I'll be focusing only on the navigational parts. As you can see, I'm already in position on the runway, and I'm all configured for takeoff. The only thing that I haven't done is configure the autopilot, and I'm going to do that right now. One thing I'm going to set is I'm going to make sure that my altitude is set to my initially cleared altitude of 5,000 feet. The game would probably have cleared me to a little bit more, but I'm going to assume my initial clearance is to 5,000 feet, and once I reach 5,000, then I'll continue my climb up to my cruise altitude of 14,000 feet. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm also going to sync the heading bug to be set to the current heading of the runway, so that when I enable the autopilot, I can quickly enable heading mode and the airplane will hold on the heading that I want, and I'll be able to also continue my climb up to my cruise altitude. If you're not familiar with how to use the FLC and HDG modes of the autopilot, make sure to check out the previous video that I did on the topic. I'll add a link to it in the description below. Alright, let's get going. Takeoff is just like normal. I'm going to apply power so that I get moving on the runway, and I'm going to make sure to keep the throttle outside of the red zone of the instruments on the right hand panel, but I'm going to try and get it as close to that section as possible just so I get the most amount of power possible for takeoff. Once I'm airborne, I'm going to have to keep a much closer eye on all of the instruments, especially the attitude indicator, the altimeter, the airspeed indicator, and the heading bug. I need to make sure to stay on my heading as I'm flying, because if I don't, I'm going to end up probably crashing into other airplanes that are in the area or that are also doing their takeoff a couple of seconds before or after me. Once I've reached a safe altitude though, I'm going to enable the autopilot right away because it's going to make it just that little bit easier for me to control the airplane. So you can see right there, I've got heading mode enabled, and I'm going to set myself to be on heading 164, which is the heading that I need to fly on that first leg of the departure. And it's also going to hold my pitch that I'm in at the moment, which is around 7.5 degree pitch, which is about what I want for my initial takeoff climb. Now I'm about to start the first segment of my departure procedure once I go by D0, which is going to be in just a couple of seconds. The next waypoint is going to be Otley. I need to hold my heading of 164 the whole way to Otley, and I also need to make sure that I'm going to have at least 932 feet of elevation by the time I get there. That's what's indicated by the little number with a bar under it on the chart on the departure for 16 center. As you can see, there's really not much to see anymore because I've passed through that first layer of clouds. All I can really see is just a few hundred feet in front of me, which if I were trying to fly this under VFR conditions would be a no-go. Alright, so I've gone by the Otley waypoint now, and I'm on my way to the next waypoint, which is going to be Renby. And for that waypoint, I need to continue on my heading of 164, but I need to climb and make sure that I'm above 3,000 feet before I reach Renby, which is going to be in about 3.6 nautical miles. I'm already at 3,500 though, so that's obviously not going to be an issue for me. Now, as we come up on Renby, this is where things start to get a little bit interesting, and you have a few choices in how you want to fly the airplane. You can either keep it on HDG mode, which I'm on right now, or you can switch on nav mode. By switching on to nav mode, the airplane's automatically going to fly the departure procedure for you. It's going to make sure that you follow all of the waypoints, but it won't handle the altitudes. The altitudes will be handled by something called VNAV, and I'll cover that in a separate video. The other interesting thing is when you are flying with nav mode, I've noticed that even though the flight path has a curb to it and doesn't go directly to Renby, the actual autopilot is going to fly to Renby before making its turn towards the west. So if you want to make your flight path a little bit rounder, you might want to stick with HDG mode and just play with your heading. But I am using nav mode now, so it's just going to keep flying to Renby, and then it's going to change course and head towards the next waypoint, which is going to be Richer. There we go, I've switched over to the next waypoint now, so I'm going from Renby over to Richer, and that's a distance of 5 nautical miles. That's also indicated on the chart, so you can see on the line between Renby and Richer, there is a 245, which is the track that you need to fly to get to Richer, and we can see that track matches up with what's expected on the MFD right here. It says 244, which is pretty much close enough to 245, and you can also see the current track that we are on as well. The distance is indicated by the little number between the parentheses between the heading. You'll notice that each of the segments of the flight is going to have exactly that same pattern where space permits. So it's going to be a heading, and just under it between parentheses there will be a number which indicates the distance that you have on that leg. So to fly the rest of the departure procedure, I really just need to hit every single one of those waypoints. I can let the nav computer do it by leaving on nav mode, or I can use the heading bug to do it myself, or I can even fly the airplane manually if I really want to. I'll probably skip forward a little bit here since there's not much to see between here and the Bangor waypoint. Alright, I skipped forward a little bit and I am now on the last leg of the departure from Tomery waypoint to Bangor waypoint. Let's compare with what we see on the chart one last time. So I am on a heading of 303, which sounds about right, and it's a distance of 25 nautical miles between Tomery and the Bangor waypoint. You can see at the Bangor waypoint there's a 10,000 number with a line under it, which means that we need to be at least 10,000 feet to cross that waypoint. That's because there are some very large mountains in the area, and anything below that would be pretty risky to impact the ground. Once I get past the Bangor waypoint, that's where I'm reaching the transition point of the departure, and I'm actually going to be heading to the Pangle waypoint in my case, since I'm heading to the north to Port Angeles. If I were heading to a destination somewhere to the west, I'd probably be going to the Arry waypoint instead. You can see there's a lot of numbers below both of those different waypoints. I'm just going to break those down really quickly because there's a little bit of new information here. So if we look at the information between the Bangor and Pango waypoint, we obviously have our altitude that we need to be flying at minimum, which is 14,000 feet. You can see below that there's a 10,000 with an asterisk right in front of it. The asterisk is telling us that we need to be at least 10,000 feet to avoid impacting any objects on the ground. That number is called the minimal obstacle clearance altitude, or MOCA for short. Below that, we again have the heading that we need to fly between those two waypoints, as well as the distance between the waypoints. The other thing you'll notice is that this chart isn't to scale, so you can't rely on it to know how long a waypoint is. You really have to look at those numbers between parentheses to know how much of a distance there is between the waypoints. That's really all there is to the RNAV departure. It's the simplest of departures for a reason, because you really just have to follow all of the different waypoints laid out by the GPS and just worry about the altitudes between the different waypoints. The next video in the IFR series will probably either be on obstacle departures or on non-RNAV departures. I haven't quite decided yet. So until then, if you do have any questions, put them in the comments below. And if you got some value out of this video, please make sure to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you all soon.